being serious. Yo! It's the Wild Wild West!
Okay, so before we get started, I wanted to point out a couple things about this tutorial. One is this tutorial is not a specific tactica or a specific strategy. Really the point of this tutorial is to teach key concepts. So I'm not going to spend too much time mired in the detail of every statistic and every rule of Malifaux. If you want to get at individual model type tacticas, what you want to do is click on the black joker. Yeah, click there on the black joker. Actually, I'll turn them right side up if it'll help. If you click on the black joker, that will take you to my series of articles where I handle each of the Collette models individually and talk about statistics. We just don't have that kind of time to do video-wise, so we're going to stick to key concepts. So a couple things as we begin. First off, why play Collette crew? Besides the fact that the models are amazing and I love them, and I enjoy the fluff, and I enjoy the Arcanist faction, Collette really offers you incredible versatility and flexibility on the field. Now, Colette's crew is not a fighting crew. Collette herself is not really a get in there and kill everything type of master. She's not a Lilith or a Perdita that can run in or has these powerful individual stats. She actually looks fairly unimpressive on paper, nor is her crew. Neither is she a stand-in-the-back type of master like a Ramos or a Nicodem that can let their crews kind of take the punch and wear you down through attrition. In fact, battles of attrition and long drawn-out fights are the exact opposite of what you want to do with a Collette crew. You don't want to get into big fights. You don't want to try and take the other guy out or wipe him off the board. That should not be your main goal. If it happens, great, but against most competent players, that's probably not likely to occur. So what is Collette good at? Well, she is incredible at getting around the board. She is great at completing most, if not all, of the movement-based strategies. Really, the only strategies that are more difficult for her would be things that do involve trying to wipe models out, like slaughter or contain power. Might be a little trickier for someone like Collette, especially if you're having a hard time getting separation of the other opponent's master. Colette's strengths are really about speed, about deception, and so the keys to victory for Collette would be focus on objectives, get those done quickly, at the same time manage your resources, and that's what I'm going to spend this first video talking about, is how to manage your resources well. And finally, watch your model count and your activation order. You don't want to get into a battle of attrition. You don't want to face too many turns where you're going to be out-activated or out-modeled by an opponent. And that's a very tricky thing to do with the Collette crew because it's often a very low model count type of crew. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about resource management. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit with a wider shot here, just so that we can talk about resource management, which is one of the keys to leading a successful Collette crew. Now, I like to look at Colette's crew and Colette's core mechanic, which is soulstone manipulation, to be kind of a, if you will, it's kind of like looking at the back interface of an operating system, where you have much more control over the system itself, but also much more potential for disaster. So if you're not managing your resources correctly, things can go bad in a hurry. If you're not paying attention to your control hand and the number of soulstones that you're running at the time, you can lose in a huge way. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Colette's soulstone cache. So she has a soulstone cache of 3. typically, that's what you're going to start with at the beginning of the game, unless you short yourself on the soulstone cost, then you can end up with more. Now, over the course of a game, a typical game for me, I will burn through as many as 12 to 15 soulstones, maybe more, depending on how intense the fight is. Now, that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot if you're running any other crew other than Collette. It's actually pretty excessive. Most masters are interested in saving their 4 to 8 soulstones typically for that one big spell, that one big moment in the game. And this is one luxury that Collette has that very few other masters have, and that is the ability to generate an incredible amount of soulstones. You'll always want to keep an eye on your soulstone cache. Generally, don't want to have any less than 2 with you at any time. Now, the more soulstones that you have, the more that you collect throughout the course of the game, the more options are going to be available to you. So your crew is going to become more and more powerful as you start gaining more and more soulstones. Well, guess what? As you start taking opponents down, typically you will be gaining soulstones as well. So it's not uncommon for you to be racking up 8 to 10, maybe even more soulstones during the course of a game. Now, a couple things to note on the soulstones. With this crew, the very first soulstone you burn each turn, you're not going to physically remove a soulstone. That's because that's the rechargeable soulstone. Collette herself has that rechargeable soulstone, and what happens is every turn that soulstone gets replenished. So that's good. That's one less soulstone that you have to worry about. It's essentially 6 free soulstones that happen in the course of a 6-turn game. Now, as far as getting soulstones, Collette has a few ways of collecting soulstones. Now, the easiest way is to work with your control hand. So these two topics kind of go hand in hand, and this is a resource management. So I've dealt myself 6 cards here. And one thing to note, an important concept, is that no cards in a Collette hand are wasted cards. As bad as this control hand kind of looks, I've got a couple of deuces in here. Deuces. 3. I've got a 7 mask. And a couple of reasonably high tomes. Tomes are great. Try to keep tomes with Collette, and I'll explain that maybe in a future video. But even these crap cards are pretty good. The reason is Collette has an action that allows her to discard 2 cards and get a soulstone. That's important. In fact, she can do that if you use the rechargeable soulstone to reactivate her. So you use your 0 action, you don't burn a soulstone. Let's say you started with 3, and it's Colette's first activation. You can say, I'm going to use that rechargeable soulstone to give myself reactivate. And during this activation, you take your 2 crappy cards, discard them, net yourself a soulstone. Then you finish your activation. And then when you come back and you pick her up again, let's say this was early in the game, so not much has happened. You still have these 2 cards that aren't so hot. You say, you know what? Nothing's really happening this turn except for people running up. I'm going to take these 2 cards, discard them, give myself another soulstone. There, now you're up to 5. And when you start again next turn, you're going to have that rechargeable soulstone again. So you just keep giving yourself reactivate, typically, as the very first thing that Colette's going to do. Now, let's say, later on in the game, this is all you've got in your hand are your 2 cards. But you really need a control hand. And you've built yourself a fair amount of soulstones. What you can do is you can take that same action that you use to generate soulstones, and you can pay it back. You can say, okay, this turn, instead of making a soulstone, I'm going to take a soulstone, discard that, and draw 2 new fate control cards. And you can totally do that, and that's a great way to manage that resource between control cards and soulstones. Now, as far as the control hand, there are some things that you are going to want to keep. I already mentioned high tomes. Why do you want to keep high tomes? Well, the most important reason to keep a high tome, well, there's two really, but the most important reason is it's a defensive mechanism for Collette. So if Collette gets hit by something and you want to mess that opponent up for hurting your beautiful master, you play a tome on the defensive, or you cheat a defensive tome in, and what that does is that triggers a blinding flash, which actually gives the attacker, the person attacking you, slow. It doesn't actually matter if they even land a hit with their attack. You can play, if they played a really low card and you don't think that they're going to be able to cheat that up, you can even play your lower tome and just say, okay, well, you're slow anyway. The other reason why you want to keep a high tome is because this is part of Colette's other really powerful trigger, and this is an offensive trigger called mannequin replacement, and I will show you that in another video. So as far as your control hand, no card in your hand is actually a bad card, but you do want to try to keep at least 1 or 2 high tomes. Now, the other thing with Collette and the control hand that you're going to want to keep, and some people may disagree with me on this one, but the other card that you're going to want to keep, if you get it in your control hand, is this guy, the Black Joker. Okay? Now, people tend to keep the Black Joker in their hand because they don't want it coming up on one of their damage flips or one of their defense flips or whatever. And I think some folks have done some statistics to show that it really doesn't make that much of a difference if that's why you're keeping the Black Joker. For Collette, however, we're keeping the Black Joker for a very specific reason. And that reason is the fact that she has slow to die, and she has some triggers that she can activate when she gets hit or when she's dying. Now, with Collette, every time you discard a Soul Stone to flip a card, you have what is called Soul Stone Augury. So every time you discard a Soul Stone, like I am here, and let's say she's doing a healing flip, you flip 2 cards, and it's a positive twist. So if I was healing myself up, I would take this moderate. Actually, they're both moderate, but you get the point. It's essentially a positive twist anytime you're discarding a Soul Stone. Wow, that would have been a great healing flip. Look at that. That would have been totally fine. The problem is, though, if you're using that as your slow to die, and you have to flip 2 cards, well, guess what? Flipping 2 cards is a little more odds of getting this guy. And if you get this guy as your slow to die, well, you're dead. So that's one of the main reasons why Collette, in particular, wants to keep this in her control hand. So whenever I get the Black Joker, I try to keep it in my control hand with Collette. In fact, I did it with other masters just because it's such a habit with me, and then I realized, wow, that doesn't really help. It really doesn't help my other masters very much. But with Collette in particular, keeping this Black Joker in your hand helps your survivability. You can be a little bit more risky, feel a little bit more comfortable if you have this in your hand and you know you're not going to flip it off of a healing flip or a slow to die action. Now, the other thing, Soul Stone count goes a long way. The more Soul Stones you have, the more risks you can take with Collette and her crew. You can, and not just physical Soul Stones, I'm talking about mechanical doves. So mechanical doves count as Soul Stones when they're used by other members of Colette's crew. And what's interesting is they give a positive flip for them, not really for Collette because she has a positive twist anyway. Now, that is some of the basics of your control hand and managing the resources. And I know this video is running a little bit long, so I'm going to cut this off here. So that is the opening, managing resources, and your control hand with Collette. Thanks.